France fell in 6 weeks. That is the fact that organizes everything else about the French experience of the Second World War. The speed of the defeat, the completeness of it, the way it arrived so fast that the people in its path had no time to construct an adequate response before the German army was already in Paris, and the armistice was already signed, and the question of what to do next had become a question that every French man and woman had to answer for themselves, without institutional guidance, inside a country that had just been divided between a German occupation zone in the north and west and a nominally independent French state in the south that would come to be known, simply, by the name of the town where its government was headquartered, Vichy. The word became, over the course of the next 4 years, one of the most loaded words in the French language, a word for collaboration, for the specific form of accommodation that a defeated people can make with an occupying force, for the gradations of complicity that run from enthusiastic assistance, through passive acceptance, through quiet resentment, through active resistance, all of them living in the same streets, eating in the same restaurants, sharing the same metro cars, each person carrying their particular relationship with the German occupation in silence or in careful whisper, or in the specific coded language that a society under surveillance develops when the normal channels of communication have been made dangerous. Paris in the autumn of 1940 was not the city it had been in the summer. It was quieter. It was more careful. The visible signs of the occupation, the German uniforms on the boulevards, the German vehicles in the streets, the swastika flags on the public buildings, were a constant reminder of the new framework within which life was now organized. Food was rationed. The black market was the informal economic system through which people with any means at all supplemented the official rations. People who had worked in one city now worked in another or did not work at all. The ordinary infrastructure of civilian life continued, in the way that ordinary infrastructure tends to continue even when the political circumstances have changed dramatically, because people still needed to eat and sleep and travel and conduct the transactions that daily existence requires. Jacques Raboud was 16 when his family left Paris for Brest in the spring of 1940, moving ahead of the German advance along roads that the Luftwaffe was strafing. 3 days of travel during which the machines in the air were making decisions about the people on the roads below. His mother protected them on the roadside. His father could not get on the train. When they arrived in Brest, the Germans were already there, having moved through the country faster than the civilians trying to evacuate it. He went back to Paris. His father was back too. He had been a prisoner briefly, but he was middle-aged and had chest trouble, and the Red Cross had arranged his return. The neighborhood had organized itself, in the way that neighborhoods under occupation organize themselves, around the categories that the occupation created. Roughly half the people, Raboud estimated looking back, would fight to be liberated. Perhaps a third would make the best of things, and the others. He said this with the directness of a man who had spent the intervening decades thinking about what the occupation had revealed about human nature, were really collaborating with the Nazis. These were not abstract categories. They were the people on his street. He knew which ones to trust. Everyone did. His father began meeting with others. Small conversations in apartments, around kitchen tables, voices kept low. The question circulating, what can we do to push the Germans out? This was not the organized resistance. The networks, the cells, the radio operators and the saboteurs and the escape lines that would eventually develop into something substantial enough to be called a movement. This was the beginning of it. Individual people, talking to each other, arriving at the decision that doing nothing was not an option they could live with. Raboud was 16, then 17. He talked to friends at school. They joined their fathers. The work, in the early years, was specific and concrete. Finding Allied servicemen who had been trapped behind the lines after the fall, hiding them, clothing them, and moving them south through the country to Spain, and then Portugal, and then eventually back to England and the Free French forces. The pump on his bicycle carried documents. He moved quietly through a city that was watching everything, relying on the network's knowledge of who could be trusted and who could not. Moving Jewish families from one address to another, passing them toward the border with false identities or no identity at all, relying on the specific mechanisms that the escape lines had developed, the safe houses, the guides, the people in the chain who did not know the names of the others in the chain, so that if one was caught, the chain would not unravel entirely. 35 families between 1941 and 1943. This was the number he kept. Not a network, not a formal organization. A teenager on a bicycle with documents in the pump. A small group of young men who had decided that the question their parents were asking around kitchen tables was also their question, and that the answer required action rather than deliberation. The Gestapo arrived at night. They always arrived at night, which was part of the psychology of it. The knock in the darkness, the leather coats, the specific combination of bureaucratic formality and implied violence that the state security apparatus of an occupying power uses when it wants to produce maximum disorientation in the people it is investigating. Raboud's father was away when they came. He was out moving another Jewish family, which was the specific circumstance that probably saved both of them. The men in the leather coats asked for his father. They asked about his friends. They named names. They told him to come with them. He asked for a jacket. They said, "Come as you are." The Gestapo had his name because a friend had been arrested and had talked under torture. This was one of the fundamental vulnerabilities of any resistance network, not the weakness of the people in it, but the human reality that torture can break people, and that the people it breaks are not failures of character but victims of a technology of pain that the body as a physical system has limited capacity to resist. The friend had not wanted to tell. The Gestapo had made it impossible for him not to. The network accepted this as an operational risk and tried to structure itself accordingly, which was why the documents in the bicycle pump were never in the apartment, and why Raboud's father was not there when the knock came. 4 days and 4 nights of interrogation. The rubber hose applied to the muscles, the specific technique that leaves no permanent visible damage but produces pain of a quality that the body cannot ignore. 6 people in the cell. A warning passed in a whisper. The man in the corner is an informer. This too was part of the architecture. The infiltrator planted among prisoners, the encouragement to talk to someone who appeared to be a fellow prisoner. The network of information gathering that extended even into the cells where people were being held. You could not trust the silence. You could not trust the company. He was put on a train to Germany. He was 17 years old. He would not see his mother again until 1945. The forced labor camp at Delmenhorst in northern Germany was not a concentration camp in the precise sense. It did not have the specific industrial apparatus of extermination that the camps in the East had developed. It was a labor camp, which meant that its purpose was the extraction of work from the people held in it, and its organization was oriented around that purpose. People were kept alive because dead people cannot work. They were not kept comfortable, or fed adequately, or treated with any reference to their legal or human status as non-combatant civilians who had been taken from their homes by an occupying power. They were kept functional. The work was the debris of Allied bombing, rubble, destroyed pipes, the physical consequences of the air campaign that was being conducted against German infrastructure, and that was, from the perspective of the people working through the rubble, a double imposition. The bombs came from the side that was ostensibly trying to liberate them. The bombs killed people he knew. The bombs injured him. He carried fragments of the earth that had been driven into his skin during explosions, and when he returned to France after the war, surgery was required to remove the gravel embedded in his body. He learned to count turns, to rotate systematically through the position of disadvantage so that no single person bore its weight continuously. 12 men in a cell, 1 canister. The SS guard who beat the last man in the procession each morning as a matter of routine. 12 days, 12 turns. When his turn came, he moved the canister behind him rather than in front, so that the guard's blow struck the canister rather than his body, and the canister, being heavy and filled, fell forward onto the guard. He laughed telling this. The laugh was not about cruelty, but about the specific satisfaction of having found, within a system designed to remove all agency from the people it held, a small and precise exercise of agency. His friend with asthma was another matter. He did not laugh about that. He did not come to it quickly. He came to it the way that men come to the memories that have never fully resolved, circling it, feeling the approach of it, and then letting it arrive, the friend who could not run anymore. The SS who beat him where he sat in the snow. The sound the friend made through the night. Raboud and the others could hear him. They could not help him. They could have killed the SS, he said this plainly, as an available fact about the state of their feelings in that moment, not as a statement of intent. They could have killed them. They could not help their friend. The intersection of these two impossibilities, the one they could have done and the one they could not, was what he carried. Not survivor's guilt in the formal psychological sense, but something more specific. The knowledge that the friend died next to people who loved him and were powerless, and that the powerlessness was constructed, that it was the product of a system that had been designed to produce exactly this quality of helplessness, so that the people being held would understand, continuously and without ambiguity, the nature of their situation. The people who gave up died. He said this with the clinical certainty of a man who had watched it happen. The people who said it is the end, who stopped projecting a future, who allowed the arithmetic of the present conditions to become the whole of their calculation, they died. The people who said, I am going to come back, who maintained the internal architecture of a future they had not yet experienced but refused to stop believing in, they came back. He did not say this as a piece of uplift. He said it as an empirical observation about the specific mechanism of survival under conditions designed to eliminate the will to survive. He carried one other image from those years alongside the asthmatic friend and the canister and the rubber hose. A German man, middle-aged, standing at a shop window near a trench where forced laborers were working, speaking to them in French without turning around, telling them that he had been a prisoner of war in France during the First World War, that he had been treated well by the French farm family that held him, that he still remembered. He came for 3 days. He brought food each day, tossing the packages into the trench when the guards' backs were turned. Then he stopped coming. Raboud did not know what had happened to him. He held the man's 3 days as a specific counterexample, evidence that the country that had produced the SS guard with the rubber hose had also produced this particular man, who had found a way to do a specific and dangerous kindness within a system that did not encourage it. Liberation came in May 1945, 3 days before VE Day. The Americans surrounded the camp. The SS guards could not escape. The captain, having seen what the camp contained, having looked at the men who had been reduced to the visible evidence of their own starvation, withdrew for 2 hours. He told them he was going to leave. He told them they could do anything they wanted with the SS. He told them he would not see anything. Raboud was at 80 pounds. He did not have the strength for what the others did. He had one SS man in particular, one who had been specifically his tormentor, and he found a stone and he cut the man's ear. The ear was hanging. That was what he had the strength for. He had always been, he said, a peaceful man. That day he was not. All the hate came back. All 3 years of it, all the accumulation of the rubber hose and the salt mines and the asthmatic friend in the snow, and it came back at once, and he used what strength he had for the one act available to him. He was in a military hospital in Paris for 3 months, fed intravenously, his mother and aunt at his bedside preparing. He would later learn for his burial, measuring him for a shroud rather than for recovery. He recovered. He decided, in the specific clarity of a man who has been close enough to death to take the measure of his own survival, that if he came back to life he would do something to express what the survival meant. He entered the priesthood. He served for 13 years. He left over a question of liturgy, a conservative, he said, in religion, though a liberal in politics. He thought about the question of whether what had happened in Germany was uniquely German. He thought about it carefully, over years, with the specific seriousness of a man who had lived inside the answer and did not want to provide a false one. His answer was no. It was human. The Spanish Inquisition, also conducted under the invocation of God, had destroyed populations. The Albigensian Crusade, other iterations of the same machinery, organized by different nations under different ideological banners, producing the same essential result, ordinary people, led a little too far, believing everything they were told, becoming instruments. The Germans who stood at the perimeter of the labor camp on Sundays to observe the prisoners the way one observes animals in a zoo were not a specific category of person. They were a category available to all people under certain conditions. He was not saying this to excuse what had happened. He was saying it to make it legible. The thing that had happened was not alien. It was not the product of a people who were fundamentally different from other people. It was the product of specific conditions, specific pressures, specific leaders with specific skills at manipulation, applied to a population that had been made sufficiently desperate and sufficiently cohesive and sufficiently frightened that the manipulation had worked. This was the conclusion he had arrived at, and he held it not as comfort but as warning. He became a priest. Then he left. Then he went back. He was, as he had described himself at the beginning of his account, a conservative in religion and a liberal in politics, a combination that the world does not always find easy to accommodate, but which had apparently accommodated itself comfortably in him. He had been on a bicycle in Paris with documents in the pump. He had been in a trench in Germany with gravel driven into his skin. He had heard his friend's voice all night in the snow. He had found a stone. "If we answer hate with hate," he said, "it will never end." He said it with the specific authority of a man who had been given at 17 more reason for hate than most people accumulate in a lifetime. He had used a stone on the ear of one man on one day. He had spent the rest of his life doing something else with the account. For his generation, he said, it was difficult to erase. He was not saying it was impossible.